how would God rule nature? Well, if you look at the text, I think it puts it all together. One of the first things you know is that he is portrayed in Genesis as a king. He's the king. He's the ruler. He's the one who made it. But in the ancient Near East, what is the most common image in Near Eastern inscriptions and documents about what a king is to do? What is the view that is portrayed again and again of the role of the king? A king is a shepherd. A king cares for his people. A king provides. A king sustains. It is a gentle king. Yes, he exercises control, but in the case of God and his perfection, it is a control that is aimed for the very best possible interests of the subjects of this creation. So, yes, he uses his abilities and his power with a particular end in mind. He is a caretaker. What has he done in Genesis 1? He has given life to all these creatures and set them free to continue to multiply and grow, each in their own kinds. He's freeing nature to be itself. He gives it life and frees it up. And he is the only true sovereign. There are some subtle shifts here. In the case of God, he's the only king, certainly, but if you look in the Hebrew Bible at these two words, kavash and radah, you will find that they are used in a very frequently in another kind of context. They're used to describe kings who are subduing people under them. But what's remarkable is that here, uniquely, you have the command that all the people are part of this caretaking of nature. And it is not something that is to lead to oppression of other people, curiously enough, because here the object is not other humans. The subject is everybody, not the king. The object is the natural world, not other people. So it's immediately put in a context of being careful for others around you. And I think you can immediately start to see that that might have implications for environmental questions. So how would we rule nature? Well, you draw on what you've seen in God's setting this up. He's the king, and he puts us in as the final crowning moment in his creation. Chapter 2 will reinforce that we are like royalty, responsible for the care of the earth, as a good ancient Near Eastern king should be. But we are not God. There are limits on how we relate to nature, because God's motives are pure, ours are not. God's foresight is limitless, ours is rather truncated. So, even in Genesis, there are limits. Nobody in ancient Israel is reading this text thinking, we can pollute freely. Nobody in ancient Israel is reading this text thinking, we can do whatever we want with the environment to make money. No. You're addressing a culture and society where the issue is, will we survive to next year? Do we have enough food? We're using the environment to sustain life so it will go on, because what we do here on our little plot of ground is all we can do. And that's the limit. If we have a bad year, nobody's importing trainloads of wheat from Kansas. We're stuck if we mishandle this. So it's a very different audience. We must have a life-sustaining environment or we won't survive. 2, God says at this stage in Genesis 1, eat plants, not meat. So there's a limit. Don't eat of one tree, this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because there's a limit on us once again. So we are tied to nature. We and the animals and the plants are clearly sustained by God. We're dependent on him to exist, and he unifies all nature in this dependence on him. Now, that's the big text, Genesis 1. I want to show you chapter 2 and chapter 3, which flow from that. Chapter 2, the Lord makes everything. We do this zoom focus, if you will, in on day 6. And it describes how the Lord, in getting things set up, is waiting for agricultural plants to be grown and tended by humans. There is not rain that he sent yet, and there's no human to work the ground. So God forms the man from the dust of the ground, hence the name Adam, coming from the Hebrew Adamah, which means soil. Basically, he's known as dirt guy every time you hear Adam in Hebrew. And God breathes into his nostrils the breath of life, and he becomes a living being. And the Lord put a garden in the east. So God's going to make a garden. And it describes that garden. The other part of the chapter to remind you of is God's commissioning the man to work the garden, 15, and take care of it, and describing the limits on the trees. He can eat from all these trees except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then God brings the animals to him to name, and God also brings him a wife, Eve. So, Genesis chapter 2. We see God with a terrific love for the natural world, if you will. A God who takes the care of making and designing a garden. God who actually sets this all up. He plants a garden, and it depicts him even in the change of the verb as creating by getting dirty. He takes dirt, he molds it with his anthropomorphic hands here, speaking metaphorically. God makes a garden. He gives it a name, Eden. Trees, a design. There's a center focal point. 2 trees in the middle. Irrigates it with these rivers, so it's a source of life for the world. He puts a farmer in it, animals, and a farmer's wife, if you will. He gets it all set up. What is the place of the human in the garden? It is to take care of the garden. 2:15. He put him there to work it. It's hard work, but God has given the resources to care for and nurture this garden. He puts us in a symbiotic relationship with the world. The garden won't be able to exist as a garden if the person isn't taking care of it. And the garden wouldn't have a reason to exist because it's primarily got these fruit trees that are producing fruit, which somebody's going to eat. Well, that's why you have Adam there. If it weren't for the garden, the person would die, because there'd be no food. And if it's not for the garden, our purpose for earthly existence would be gone. So we have a God who loves the garden, loves nature, puts us in it with a place, and makes sure that we fit in as this responsible royalty. A royal couple, but given a job to do as a team to take care of what God made. Chapter 3, you know the story. The serpent shows up and deceives, deludes the woman and then the man into rebelling against God. So once sin enters, what has just happened? The creature rules the people. It turns on upside down exactly the order that was to be there. Then, in the end of the chapter, or as we go along, there are consequences of their sin. There is a serpent under a curse, the woman, pain in childbirth, and Adam's toil in agriculture because the ground is producing thorns and thistles. So Genesis brings out this intimate connection. It's hard to miss how our sin affects and hurts nature. This unity among the creatures, human and animal. Genesis affirming both our responsibility for the natural world and our inescapable relation with the natural world.